Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. In the comments for this video here, how to use an API to get data for your web app, I had someone who asked a question. They said, what if I wanted to use this in a real world way? So this is sort of a contrived thing to show you how to use that to sort of just get it output to the page. So this is just sort of the mechanics of using that, but they're asking how would I take those images and then put them into an actual grid structure. So I have another tutorial that I've done about how to build a responsive grid with CSS Grid. So it takes you from, a mobile size all the way up to a large size, sort of just the basics of using CSS Grid layout. So what I thought I would do, and this was my suggestion to the commenter, was to sort of combine these two videos or these two Codepens together in order to take the data from using the API and then simply slot it into the image source of the other Codepen. And maybe it's not quite clear as to what you might do there, but I'm going to go ahead and just show you how I would do this. So what I've done is I've actually forked the grid pen, the one where I showed you how to set up, a grid layout. And this one used to have a structure like this, and inside here would be a source.unsplash, which is sort of tapping into the Unsplash API in order to get a photo. But this was essentially, it was like this, and then, you would come down and, it was sort of like this, and then, you just had several images that were coming down, but it was built into the HTML, and then this link to the source image was hard-coded. But what we want is to be able to dynamically go to the Unsplash API, search for a specific term, or go to a specific collection, or go to a user, and then return images as data, and then be able to insert those images into this source right here. So I'm going to show you how I would do this. This is a little bit more extensive, but not a lot past. If you've already done this, looked at this how to use an API, we're just simply taking this one step farther, and then we're taking that data, and then we're going to output it to the page, which we did a little bit of that inside this Codepen, inside the video. We appended some particular information, but now we're going to append it into just a more meaningful way, I guess. And there's a couple of roadblocks along the way that we're just going to try to work out together. So I shouldn't need to touch any of this, because what we're going to do is simply insert our images into the grid. So everything just about that we're going to do in this video is going to be in the JavaScript. So I already have jQuery connected. This is the container that we're going to output the HTML and the new source files for our images to. And we have our JavaScript set up here. So I have something called a test app. It's just something I use for things like this, where I can just sort of test something with the Unsplash API, because I find it super easy to work with. The documentation is really great. So, but you could use any API, to get data from anything. So I just wanted to sort of keep that here. I'm not actually going to use that variable. I'm going to put this straight into our JSON call. So we're going to start with a get JSON call, and it looks just like that. And what it takes is the URL to the API, and then it also takes a function. So after it makes that call, it wants to do something afterwards. And for us, we are going to return the data, and then we're going to console log that data so that we can see what came back from this test app when it reached out to the Unsplash API. Now, this is the documentation. There's a lot of stuff here. We're first going to go down to, because what we want to do is our goal is to search the Unsplash API for a particular keyword, and then we're going to bring that back. We're going to bring back those images into this data object. We're going to console log them for now, and so we'll be able to see them in the console for the JavaScript. And then when we look through the console, through the log of the data, then we can pull out, we can begin to go out and use variables to assign that data meaningful names and information that we can reuse and insert into our HTML. So that's the path that we're going on, and we just have to find out how to get there. So what we want to do is we want to come down and we want to get a list of photos. Actually, we want to search. Let's search photos. And you can also search collections, or you can search users. But let's search photos. So you can see here that the link is here, the way that we would search the photos. So it's https://api.unsplash.com/search. So we're going to do a search, and we're going to search photos. We're not searching collections. And then we have some parameters here that we can add in. So I'm just going to copy this for now, because that's actually the URL that I want to link to. And I'm going to take this page part out, but let's change our query. The query is the keyword that you want to search for. I love Chicago. I live in Chicago. And so I'm going to search for images that are tagged with the keyword Chicago. And I think this searches the title of the photo. It also searches metadata. So this is sort of a broad search for images. And we don't need that. So it's going to look just like this. And this is going to search all the photos at Unsplash with the keyword Chicago. So if you had gone to unsplash.com and you typed in the keyword Chicago, it should be bringing up the same or similar photos. Now we're connected here. The problem is I need an API key in order to get into. So when this makes a call, Unsplash looks at it at the front door and says, do you have an access key in order to get in? And right now my call has to say, no, I don't have any access. And Unsplash is going to say, sorry, you can't come in and look for the data. So what we have to do is we have to put something called client_ID, and that's going to be equal to our API key. Now this API key is it's the access key. So you have a secret key and an access key. The secret key allows you to do user authentication, I think, but the access key is just to get into the front door and to do a basic search like this. So now we have our key to get in. So Unsplash is going to ask, do you have a key to get in? And we're going to say, yes, my client ID is this. And then they're going to allow us to go in and do our search for Chicago photos. Now, we have our function set up to return data, and so we're going to console log the data that gets returned after we do this search. So let's save first, and then we'll go to the debugger mode, which simulates pretty well what it's going to look like on the open web. Now we don't have anything here because our grid is empty, right? So if we look in the inspector tools, which is Control-Shift-I and Chrome, you can also do inspect whatever browser you're using. Now we returned an object here. So we're in the console. We have our page. You see our grid here. If we go to console, this is all the JavaScript that's being written to the console. And now you can see that we have 10 results. And there are actually a total of 869 that came back tagged Chicago. There are 87 pages worth of images tagged Chicago, and each one has 10 images on it. So 87 times 10 is 870, so there's almost one page only has 9, the last page. Now if we click into our results, we can see that it's by default giving us 10 images. And then if we look inside of each one, I don't really need that. If we look inside each one, we can see that this is the link to the image itself, a place to download it, the download location of the image. You can just see the HTML page of the image. So if we take that and we look at it in the page, then you will be able to see the actual image page on unsplash.com. So you can see that we're on the unsplash.com page or website. So that's not the raw data, that's the page where it's available. If you can see that there are some tags here, Chicago is probably one of them. Maybe not. Nope. So it's got some tags to it. You can see it was last updated here, and then we have the URLs and the user. You can see who the user was, who took the photo. And we are interested in this section here where it says URLs. So if we just get this URL here and we open that in our browser, that should take us straight to the raw image. So you can see here this is the raw photograph with a lot of extra parameters tied to it. So this is a 1080 pixels wide, and it's sort of fitting into the area that they've given it. But this is the photo, unique ID, and it's being served through images.unsplash.com. So this is our actual photo. This is what we want. We want this. If you went in and you saved this image and you downloaded it to your computer, you would have the raw image itself. And so what we're going to do is we need to get this information here into our data set. So what we're going to do is we're returning an object. So this is our data object. You can see here that this is data. And if we go into that, we have a couple different things. We have the total number of images returned. We have the total pages, and so how many pages of images are being returned. And then we also have this results object. So if you remember from the API video, if we go in and we say variable results, or you could call it image list, I don't know. You could really call it anything. Essentially it's an image list, right? So we have a list of images. So image list is fine. It's a little verbose, but that's going to be equal to data.results. So we go in to this results, and then we're going to get our list. So if we console log that image list, then what you're going to see is we're going to actually get the raw image list. Okay, so we have our list of 10 items, and then what we're going to do is we're going to sort of roll through or loop through each of these images, and we're going to pull out the information that we need. So the way that we do that in jQuery, at least, is we use an each statement, and we say for each item in the image list, we're going to go through each one. We're going to loop through each item in the image list, and we're going to run a function. And that function is going to take two parameters. One is the index, so that's the 0. That's this part here. So this will be the index. So the first one is going to be 0, the second one is 1, etc. And then the value is going to be the actual data that's returned. And so if we console log value, then we should actually have the data from each image, and that should be returned. Okay, so you can see each of these is an image, and it gets returned. So all we've done is we've gone into results, and then we've looped through each of these and sort of separated them out. Okay, so you see this first one is IDUEVMK, same thing here, right? This image is the same as this image. Okay, so you get the same data, but it allows us to sort of, we can go through each of these, and then we can begin to pull out the information that we want, which you remember is under URLs, right? So for each of these, we're going to say sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I list everything out here. So variable image is going to equal the value, and then we're going to set another variable to be the image URL, and that's going to be value dot URLs dot regular. Now what this should do is it should return all of the regular URLs. So what we're looking at is we're going to go into URLs, and then we're going to go into regular, and it should return all of these URLs for each of the images that we have displayed, or the data that we have. So we say console log image URL, and this should give us just the URLs, which is the information that we really want to get to. Okay, so now you see that we have the raw URL for each of our images. And if we open that in a new tab, you can see that we're going to get the same thing that we got when we took the URL and we put it into our tab. So this is the raw image URL. You can see the source file here, or the source of the image here. And we need to save this. Actually, we have this. And what we need to do is we need to input this into our grid somehow. Now remember, our grid structure is like this. It's a div called image, and then inside that image is an image tag, and it's going to have a source, which is going to be image URL. We just got our source URL, and then you could put alt text in there. You could even go into your image itself and see if there's some alt text in there. Let's see, what we have. You could use a description if it's there. Probably just have to put your own alt text inside of that. It doesn't look like there is any alt text by default, but this would be the one, the description. So if there's a description, then you should be able to use that description. So a photo of a high-rise building, you would be able to collect this just like we did our URLs, and then we could put that into our alt text if it exists. So what we need to do is for each of these, what we want to take is we want to take the regular URL, and we want to insert it into this source, and then we want to output this whole thing. We want to append it to the grid. So we want to do one, and then under that do another, and under that do another, until we've gone through all of the images that we have. Okay, so right now we have 10 images that are being served back to us. And you can see that the array is 10. pieces of data. So we have 10 image URLs. And so we should wind up with 10 of these under the grid. So we stay inside of our each here. And so for each one that we go through, we want to build this HTML component. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the grid. So we say the element with the class name of grid. We want to append this information. And so now we need to build in the HTML, we need to build this part here. So we're just going to say div with a class of image. And we'll just close that div. And then inside that div, we're going to put an image tag. And we're going to say the source is equal to something. So that's our generic image tag, right? And then inside of this, instead of just typing something here, we need to put a variable. We need to insert this image URL. So we take this and we put the single quotes. We do 2 plus signs, and then in between the 2 plus signs we put our variable image URL, and you can see that it turns blue so that it's connected, and as soon as I do that, it's pulling in all this information. So these are the first 10 photos that are coming from this call right here. If you wanted to change where it is, you could say New York, and then just like that you would get New York photos. You could say young woman, and then just like that you would be pulling in photos of young women. Or you could say dogs, and then just like that you'd be pulling in photos of dogs. So this is your search parameter here. I'm going to leave it at Chicago so that we keep pulling in photos from my favorite city. And you can see here that our CSS styles have already taken. Okay, so all of our grid styles are being attached. This one is empty, so it's given us an empty space at the beginning. So you can see all of our grid CSS grid styles are applied. It's just that we're going out and we're taking these images and we're getting them dynamically, as opposed to hard coding them into the page. So when we look at our page here, we can see that it goes out and it grabs our images, and we have our grid. Now we run into some issues here when we're using Unsplash, because all these images are not uploaded at the same file size. You can see this is portrait, and this is landscape, and this is square, and more portrait images. You can see that this one is shorter than this one, so they don't come across at the same line. So you're running into some sizing issues. Now with CSS Grid, there's no great way to do this. CSS Grid doesn't necessarily create a nice even structure for you to deal with. So you're going to have to go through and figure out some CSS things in order to make these fit, if you want just a nice neat square grid, and you don't want these to be like this, where there's, this is only half as tall as this one. Now you could use something like, you could incorporate something like masonry.js to sort of just bring these things underneath each other and not use CSS Grid at all. So CSS Grid is going to give you a very strong and solid layout structure. So if you take away that strong layout structure, you could use masonry.js and just make this sort of a Pinterest style masonry grid. which would be fine and look okay, I think. For our purposes, we want to eliminate these portrait images. So we can do that by looking at a couple of things. Let's look back at our code here. So we have our data coming back, we have our results, and let's look inside of one of these. You can see here that it does return a height and it does return a width of the image that we are being served. So if we only want images whose width is greater than its height, which would be these images here, then we can come in and programmatically do that inside of our JavaScript. So we just put an if statement and we say if this happens, then do this. But we need to collect a little information here first. So let's do that. We need to collect our image width, and that's going to be equal to val.width. So the way that we get that is, remember that this is our value now, right? This image. So this value, and then we go into that and we say the width. So val.width. And if we go in and we say variable image height equals val.height, then we should get both of the values that we need. And then all we have to do is compare these two and then output the images that come back. So if our image width is greater than our image height, then we run the code that's inside here. Then we just run this code. Otherwise, if the image height is equal to or greater than our image width, then it will not return those images. Okay, let's just clean that up a little. A semicolon here. And so you can see that we've eliminated all of our portrait images. Now if we just reverse this and we say if the image width is less than our image height, then we return those images. And so you see we get our portrait images back. And then it eliminates all of those landscape images. But we wanted to get our landscape images. You can see that there's still no guarantee that through CSS Grid, unless it's on mobile, mobile's going to look great, regardless what you do. But once you get out here, you're still going to run into some alignment issues that you might still want to use masonry.js, or you might want to programmatically make sure that these fit.